A rancher with nothing left offered water to the warriors who had taken everything from him. But what those warriors didn't know was that the man standing before them had already lost the only thing worth protecting. And when the dust settled that day, the woman leading them would make a choice that defied every law of survival she'd ever known. You're about to discover how one act of impossible compassion became the moment that changed a war nobody thought could end. 3 days without rain. Callan Dryden dragged the bucket up from the well, his arms burning with the familiar ache of repetition. The rope was fraying. He'd noticed it yesterday. Today, he noticed it again. Tomorrow he'd notice it, until it finally snapped and he'd have to fashion a new one from strips of leather he didn't have. The water sloshed against the wooden sides, and he set it down near the fence post where the ground was still cracked from last summer. The rancho stretched out behind him like a broken promise. 2 horses in a corral that should have held 20, a barn with gaps in the walls wide enough to see through, fields that hadn't produced a decent crop in 3 seasons. But the well still gave water, clean, cold water that came up sweet no matter how dry the land got around it. He heard them before he saw them, the sound of movement through the brush to the east. Not careful movement, desperate movement. Callan's hand went to his side, found nothing there. He'd sold his rifle 4 months ago to pay for feed. The knife in his boot would have to be enough, though he knew it wouldn't be. 5 figures emerged from the tree line. He recognized what they were immediately. Warriors. Apache. 3 men, 2 women. All of them moving wrong. Injured. One of the men was being half carried by the others. The woman at the front had blood soaked through the cloth wrapped around her shoulder, but she walked with her spine straight, her eyes scanning the property with the precision of someone who'd survived by seeing threats before they materialized. Nayeli. He didn't know her name yet, but he could see the authority in how the others deferred to her position. She stopped 30 feet from the well, and the group stopped with her. Her gaze locked onto the bucket of water sitting by the fence post. Then it moved to Callan, then back to the water. Nobody spoke. The sun was directly overhead now, burning the back of his neck. One of the warriors, younger than the others, had his hand near his weapon. The tension in his jaw said he was in pain. They all were. Callan could see it in how they held themselves, the slight tremor in their stances, the way they kept glancing at the well as if it might disappear. Nayeli took 1 step forward, just one. Her eyes never left his face. She was waiting for him to run, or to reach for a weapon, or to shout for help that wouldn't come. Callan had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who'd been betrayed so many times that trust had become a foreign language. He reached down slowly and picked up the bucket. The water rippled. 5 sets of eyes tracked the movement. Callan took 3 steps toward them and stopped. The young warrior's hand tightened on his weapon. Nayeli raised her other hand slightly, a gesture that froze him in place. Callan set the bucket down on the ground between them. Then he stepped back. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, but his hands didn't shake. He'd made his choice. Now he'd live with whatever came next. Nayeli stared at him. The moment stretched out like pulled wire. Behind her, one of the warriors said something in a language Callan didn't understand. It sounded like a warning. She didn't respond. Her eyes were still locked on his, searching for the trap, the trick, the betrayal that had to be coming. But Callan just stood there, waiting. The water sat between them like a test neither of them knew how to pass. The silence broke when the wounded warrior collapsed. His legs gave out, and the man supporting him struggled to keep him upright. The sound of his body hitting the dirt was like a stone dropping into still water. Nayeli's attention snapped to him for just a second, but that second was enough. She made a decision. She moved toward the bucket. Not quickly. Every step was deliberate, her eyes flicking between Callan and the water. When she reached it, she knelt down slowly, her injured shoulder making the movement stiff. Her hand touched the rim of the bucket. She lifted it, drank. The water ran down her chin, and she didn't bother wiping it away. Then she carried it back to the others. The young warrior, Matto, grabbed it from her hands the moment she was close enough. He drank like a man drowning, then passed it to the older warrior beside him. Kohana drank more carefully, his weathered face showing nothing. The bucket moved between them until it reached the fallen man. They tilted his head up, poured water between his cracked lips. Some of it went into his mouth. Most of it didn't. Callan watched from where he stood. He hadn't moved. His hands hung at his sides, loose but ready. Nayeli straightened and turned back to face him. The bucket was empty now. She held it in one hand, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Why? Her voice was rough, the words shaped awkwardly by a language that wasn't her first. Callan didn't answer right away. The question had too many answers, and none of them would make sense to someone who'd spent years learning that survival meant never trusting your enemy. He looked past her at the injured warrior on the ground, at the way the others had positioned themselves around him protectively. "You needed it," he said finally. Matto said something sharp in their language. It sounded like an accusation. Nayeli raised her hand again, the same gesture that had stopped him before. She kept her eyes on Callan. "Your people kill mine," she said. "Mine kill yours. You give water?" "I give water," Callan said. The simplicity of it seemed to confuse her more than reassure her. She glanced back at her group, then at the well, then at the rancho behind him. Calculating. Callan could see the thoughts moving behind her eyes. This was a trap. Had to be. Men like him didn't just help. Not without wanting something. Not after everything that had happened between their peoples. But there were no other men. No rifles pointed from the windows. No horses saddled and ready to chase them down. Just one man with empty hands and a well that still had water in it. Nayeli took a step closer. Callan's muscles tensed, but he didn't move. She was close enough now that he could see the pain lines around her eyes. The way she held her injured shoulder slightly forward to protect it. Close enough that if she wanted to kill him, she could. "The well," she said, gesturing toward it. "More water there?" "Yes." "You let us take?" Callan looked at the fallen warrior again. The man's breathing was shallow, his skin too pale. Whatever had happened to him, he needed more than water. He needed rest, treatment, time, things that couldn't happen if they tried to keep moving. "Take what you need," Callan said. Matto stood up abruptly, his hand going to his knife. He said something rapid and angry to Nayeli. She responded in the same language, her tone sharp enough to cut. The exchange went back and forth twice before Matto fell silent, his jaw clenched tight. But his hand stayed near his weapon. Nayeli turned back to Callan. "He says you poison the water. Wait for us to die." "Water's clean," Callan said. "I drink from it every day." She studied him for another long moment. Then she walked past him, heading toward the well. He turned to watch her. She peered down into the darkness, then lowered the bucket on its fraying rope. The sound of it hitting water echoed up. When she pulled it back up, she drank again, deeper this time. Testing. The water was clean. She knew it as soon as it hit her stomach. No poison, no trick, just water. She looked at Callan over the rim of the bucket, and for the first time, something other than suspicion crossed her face. Something closer to confusion, or maybe recognition. But before either of them could speak, Kahana called out a warning. His voice was urgent, his arm pointing east, back toward the tree line they'd emerged from. Callan followed the gesture and felt his stomach drop. More movement in the brush. But these weren't warriors. These were riders. At least 6 of them. And they were coming fast. The riders broke through the tree line like a storm rolling in. 6 men on horseback, rifles visible against their saddles, faces hard with purpose. Callan recognized the man in front immediately. Garrett Fisk, a rancher from 15 miles south, the kind of man who measured his worth by how much land he controlled, and how many people feared him. The Apache warriors reacted instantly. Matto and Kahana moved to flank Nayeli, their bodies forming a protective line in front of their fallen companion. Nayeli's hand went to her weapon, her injured shoulder forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. They were trapped, exhausted, wounded, and now caught in the open with nowhere to run. Callan stood between them and the approaching riders. He hadn't planned to. His feet had just carried him there, putting his body in the space where violence was about to erupt. Fisk pulled his horse up 20 feet away, the other riders forming a loose semicircle behind him. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in the Apache warriors, the bucket of water, Callan standing in the middle of it all. His expression shifted from determination to confusion, to something darker. "Dryden," Fisk said, his voice carrying across the distance. "Step aside." Callan didn't move. "We've been tracking these raiders for 2 days," Fisk continued. "They hit the Morrison place, killed livestock, burned supplies. We're taking them in." Behind Callan, Nayeli spoke quietly in her own language. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. She was telling her people to be ready, to fight if they had to die fighting rather than be captured. "They came here for water," Callan said. "That's all." Fisk leaned forward in his saddle. "You giving aid to hostiles now, Dryden? After what they did to your..." He stopped himself, but the words hung in the air anyway. Unfinished but understood. Callan's jaw tightened. They needed water. I gave it, they're leaving. The hell they are. One of the other riders, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, raised his rifle slightly. They're coming with us. Dead or breathing makes no difference to me. Matto shifted his weight, his hand tightening on his knife. The movement drew the attention of two other riders, who adjusted their grips on their own weapons. The air felt compressed, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Look at them, Garrett," Callan said, keeping his voice level. "They've got one man who can't even stand. They're not raiders. They're survivors. Survivors who killed Morrison's cattle and left his family without food for winter." Fisk shot back. "You want to defend that?" "I want to stop more killing," Callan said. "Right here. Right now." Fisk's horse pawed at the ground, sensing its rider's tension. Behind him, the other men were getting restless. Callan could see it in how they shifted in their saddles, in the way their fingers drummed against their rifles. They'd come here expecting a fight. They wanted one. "You're making a mistake, Dryden," Fisk said. "These people are your enemy. They'll kill you the second you turn your back." Callan glanced over his shoulder at Nayeli. She was watching him with those same intense eyes, trying to understand what was happening, what this man was doing by staying between her people and the rifles pointed at them. Her hand was still on her weapon, but she hadn't drawn it. She was waiting, calculating. "Maybe," Callan said, turning back to Fisk. "But that's my choice to make, not yours." The silence that followed was worse than the arguing. Fisk's face went hard, his mouth pressing into a thin line. He looked at his men, then back at Callan. The math was simple. 6 armed riders against 1 unarmed rancher, and 5 wounded warriors. But Callan was standing in the middle, and to get to the Apache, they'd have to go through him first. "You're protecting them," Fisk said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. "I'm standing on my land," Callan replied. "And I'm telling you to leave." One of the riders laughed. It was a harsh sound, devoid of humor. "You hear this? Man's lost his mind." But Fisk wasn't laughing. He was studying Callan with a new kind of attention, trying to figure out what had changed in the man he'd known for years. The man who'd lost everything to this same conflict and should have been the first to want revenge. Behind Callan, Nayeli lowered her hand from her weapon. Slowly. The gesture was small, but Kohana noticed it. Then Matto. The tension in their stances eased just slightly, though they remained ready. Fisk saw it too. He saw the way the warriors were responding to Callan's presence, the way the standoff had shifted into something he hadn't anticipated. His horse backed up a step, responding to the pressure of his rider's knees. "This isn't over, Dryden," Fisk said. "Not by a long shot." He pulled his horse around and jerked his head at his men. They followed, reluctant but obedient. The 6 riders turned back toward the tree line, their departure slower than their arrival, as if Fisk was still considering whether to change his mind. Callan watched them until they disappeared into the brush. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to him. He turned to face the Apache warriors. Nayeli was staring at him, not with suspicion anymore, with something else entirely. The wounded warrior's name was Dakota. Callan learned this when Kohana spoke it quietly while checking the man's breathing. The name meant nothing to Callan, but the way they said it, with a weight that suggested shared history and respect, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just any warrior. This was someone who mattered. Nayeli approached Callan slowly, her movements more cautious now than when she'd first arrived. The dynamic had shifted. He'd put himself between her people and certain death, and that changed the mathematics of trust in ways neither of them fully understood yet. "You make enemy," she said, gesturing toward where Fisk and his men had disappeared. "For us." "I made a choice," Callan replied. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Why? It was the second time she'd asked. The first time, he'd given her the simple answer. This time, standing in the aftermath of what he'd just done, the simple answer wasn't enough. He looked past her at Dakota lying in the dirt, at Matto, who still watched him with suspicion, at Kahana, whose weathered face revealed nothing. 4 years ago, Callan said slowly, I had a wife. Her name was Rebecca, and a daughter, Ellie. She was 6. Nayeli went very still. Even Matto, who'd been pacing near the well, stopped moving. There was a raid, Callan continued, his voice flat, emptied of emotion through years of repetition. Not by your people. By settlers dressed to look like your people. They wanted the land north of here. Thought if they could start a war, they could take it. He paused, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. They killed Rebecca and Ellie, made it look like warriors did it. And it worked. Started the war they wanted. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one had shape and weight, pressing down on all of them. I found out the truth 6 months later, Callan said. Overheard men talking in town, bragging. They got the land they wanted. My family got buried. He finally looked directly at Nayeli. So no, you're not my enemy. You never were. Nayeli's expression shifted, something cracking in the careful control she'd maintained. She glanced back at her people, then at Callan. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. My husband, she said. My 2 sons. Killed by settlers. Real settlers. Not men pretending. She touched her wounded shoulder absently. This from same day. 3 months passed. The parallel hung between them. 2 losses that could never be equaled or compared, but existed in the same space of grief. Callan understood now why she'd been so suspicious of his help, why trust had become impossible for her. She'd learned the same lesson he had, just from the other direction. Matto said something sharp in their language. Nayeli responded, her tone firm. The young warrior shook his head, clearly disagreeing, but he didn't push further. Instead, he turned his attention to Dakota, kneeling beside him to check his wounds. He does not trust, Nayeli said to Callan. Cannot blame him. No, Callan agreed. Can't blame him. Kohana walked over to the well and lowered the bucket again. This time, there was no hesitation, no testing. He drank, then brought water to Dakota. The ritual of it felt significant, like a barrier slowly dissolving. Your man needs rest, Callan said, nodding toward Dakota. Real rest, not just water. Nayeli looked toward the barn, then back at him. You offer shelter? I offer the barn. It's not much, but it's better than the open ground. And when the riders return? She asked. Because they both knew Fisk would return. Men like him always did. Then we deal with it, Callan said. Matto stood up abruptly. He strode over to Nayeli and spoke rapidly, his hands gesturing emphatically. She listened, her face impassive, then responded in a tone that brooked no argument. Matto's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. The hierarchy was clear. Nayeli led, and her word was final. She turned to Callan. We accept, but I stay outside. Watch. Watch for what? For when you change mind, she said simply. When you remember we are enemy after all. Callan wanted to tell her that wouldn't happen, that he'd already made his choice and wouldn't reverse it, but he understood that words meant nothing right now. Only actions mattered. Only time would prove whether this fragile thread of trust could hold any weight. Kohana and Matto lifted Dakota carefully, carrying him toward the barn. Callan walked ahead of them, pushing the door open. The interior was dim and musty, but it was dry and out of the sun. They laid Dakota on a pile of old hay in the corner. As they worked, Callan noticed something, a shift in how they moved around him. Not friendly, not yet, but not hostile either. Wary acceptance, perhaps. The beginning of something that hadn't existed an hour ago. He stepped outside to find Nayeli standing near the well, her good hand resting on its stone edge. She was looking east, toward the tree line, her body tense with anticipation, waiting for the riders to come back, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But what came through the tree line wasn't riders. It was a woman on foot, moving fast, her dress dusty and torn. She stumbled into the clearing and stopped when she saw them, her eyes going wide with fear when she recognized Nayeli as Apache. Then she collapsed. Callan reached the woman first. She was young, maybe 20, with blonde hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her breathing came in short, panicked gasps, and when he touched her shoulder to check if she was conscious, she flinched violently. It's all right, Callan said. You're safe. Her eyes opened, unfocused and wild. They landed on Nayeli standing a few feet away, and the woman screamed. Not loud. Her throat was too dry for that, but the terror in the sound was absolute. She scrambled backward, trying to get away from Nayeli, from Callan, from everything. Please, she gasped. Please don't. Please. Nayeli took a step back, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. But the woman wasn't seeing that. She was seeing an Apache warrior, and in her mind, that meant only one thing. Callan positioned himself between them, breaking the line of sight. Look at me, he said to the woman. Just look at me. What happened? Where did you come from? The woman's breathing slowed slightly. Her attention pulled to his face. Morrison Ranch, she managed. They came. So many of them. We ran. My brother, he told me to run. And I did. But I heard. She stopped, her whole body shaking. I heard the shots. Callan's stomach went cold. Morrison Ranch. The same place Fisk had mentioned. The same raid he'd used as justification to hunt Nayeli's group. He glanced back at Nayeli, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. How many attacked? Callan asked the woman. At least 20. Maybe more. They came at dawn. We didn't have time to... She broke off again, tears streaming down her face. My brother. My father. I don't know if they... Matto emerged from the barn, drawn by the commotion. When he saw the woman, he stopped short, said something to Nayeli in their language. Her response was quick and sharp. Matto's face darkened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he disappeared back into the barn. We need to get her water, Callan said to Nayeli. She nodded once and moved to the well, giving the woman a wide berth. The young woman watched Nayeli's every movement, her body coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. When Nayeli brought the bucket over and set it down near Callan, the woman looked at it like it might be poisoned. It's clean, Callan said. I promise. She drank anyway, desperation overriding fear. The water seemed to help. Her breathing evened out, and some of the wildness left her eyes. When she lowered the bucket, she looked at Callan with a new awareness. Why is she here? The woman asked, her voice steadier now. Why are you helping them? Before Callan could answer, Nayeli spoke. We not attack Morrison Ranch. The woman's head snapped toward her. You're lying. She's not, Callan said. They've been here all morning, wounded. One of them can barely breathe. They couldn't have attacked anyone. The woman stared at him, trying to process this information. But Garrett Fisk said... Fisk was here, Callan interrupted. He saw them. If he's telling people they raided Morrison, he's lying. Understanding began to dawn on the woman's face, followed immediately by horror. Then who? The answer came in the form of gunshots. Multiple rifles, coming from the direction of the Morrison Ranch. Close enough that the sound carried clearly across the morning air. Close enough that Callan could tell there were at least a dozen weapons firing. Nayeli's head turned sharply toward the sound. Matto and Kohana emerged from the barn, weapons ready. The woman went rigid, her hand clutching Callan's arm. That's the Morrison place, she whispered. That's home. More gunshots. Then shouting. Then silence. The kind of silence that follows violence, heavy and final. Callan felt the pieces clicking together in his mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. The raid on Morrison, Fisk tracking Apache warriors who were actually fleeing their own injuries. The convenient timing. The way Fisk had looked at him when he'd mentioned what happened to Callan's family. It's happening again, Callan said quietly. Someone's starting a war, using both sides to do it. Nayeli met his eyes. She understood. He could see it in the way her expression hardened, in the set of her jaw. They were being played. All of them. Settlers and Apache alike, manipulated into killing each other while someone else profited from the land left empty. The woman was shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. My family, she said. My brother. They killed them too. She couldn't finish the sentence. Kohana spoke to Nayeli urgently. She responded, her tone grim. Matto joined in, gesturing toward the tree line. They were arguing about something, their voices low but intense. What are they saying? Callan asked. Nayeli turned to him. More of my people are coming. Kohana saw signs this morning. They follow our trail. If they find us here, with you, with her, she gestured at the woman. They will not understand. They will see enemy and attack. How long do we have? An hour, maybe less. The woman looked between them, her eyes wide. What do we do? Callan looked at Nayeli. She looked back. Between them, wounded warriors in his barn, a traumatized settler woman, and the riders who would return with reinforcements. And now more Apache warriors coming who would see this situation as a trap or betrayal. Every choice led to bloodshed, except maybe one. We stop them, Callan said. All of them, before more people die for someone else's lies. Nayeli studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. We stop them. But neither of them knew if stopping a war that had already started was even possible. The woman's name was Sarah Morrison. She told them this while pacing near the well, her hands wringing together with nervous energy. She couldn't stay still. Every few seconds her eyes darted toward the tree line, expecting her brother to emerge, expecting someone to come and tell her it had all been a mistake. Callan knew that look. He'd worn it himself 4 years ago. "We need a plan," Nayeli said, her voice cutting through the tension. She stood near the barn entrance, positioned where she could see both the eastern and western approaches to the property. "My people come from north. They follow our tracks. When they see us here, they think trap." "Can you explain?" Callan asked. "Tell them what happened?" "Words not enough. Not after what they see already. Too much blood. Too much death." She touched her wounded shoulder again. "They see me with settlers. They think I betray them." Matto said something from inside the barn. Nayeli responded, her tone sharp. The young warrior emerged, his expression dark. He spoke directly to Callan this time, the words incomprehensible, but the accusation in them clear. "He says this is your fault," Nayeli translated. "Says you bring more danger. Says we should leave now before your people or mine arrive." "He might be right," Callan said. Sarah spun toward him. "You can't let them leave. Those riders, Fisk and his men, they'll hunt them down. They'll kill them." "They hunt us anyway," Matto said in broken English, his first words spoken in Callan's language. "We die running or die here. Same thing." "It's not the same," Callan said. "Running, you die for nothing. Here, we have a chance to expose what's really happening." Kohana emerged from the barn, leaving Dakota inside. He spoke to Nayeli at length, his weathered face grave. She listened, nodding occasionally, then turned to Callan. "Kohana says there is old way to show peace between enemies. Smoke signal, specific pattern. It means talk, not fight." She paused. "But it means both sides must agree to see it, must agree to trust." "Will your people honor it?" Callan asked. "Some will. Enough, maybe." She looked at him directly. "Will yours?" Callan thought about Fisk, about the men who'd followed him here, about the ones who'd killed his family and started this whole cycle of violence. "Some won't, but there are others. People who are tired of burying their children, their wives. People who want it to stop." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "My brother wanted it to stop. He talked about it all the time, said there had to be another way." Her voice broke. "He's probably dead now because someone else wanted it to continue." The weight of that truth settled over all of them. Someone was profiting from this war. Someone with enough power to manipulate both sides, to stage attacks, to keep the cycle spinning. And as long as settlers and Apache kept killing each other, that someone remained invisible. "The signal," Callan said to Nayeli. "How do we make it?" She gestured to the sky. "Fire. Green wood. Makes smoke that rises straight. 3 columns, then 2, then 1. Old pattern. Means come to talk. Weapons down." "And if they don't honor it?" Matto demanded. "If they see signal and attack anyway?" "Then we die," Nayeli said simply. "But we die trying to stop this, not running from it." Matto's jaw worked, his hands clenching into fists. He looked at Kohana, who nodded once, slow and deliberate. The old warrior's agreement seemed to matter. Matto's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight draining out of him. "We need green wood," Callan said, "and we need it fast." They scattered to gather what they needed. Sarah helped despite her shaking hands, dragging branches from the tree line. Kohana went to check on Dakota again, then returned with strips of cloth they could use to control the smoke. Matto moved like a shadow, quick and efficient, his earlier hostility channeled into action. Callan worked alongside Nayeli, building the fire structure near the well, where it would be visible from all directions. Their hands brushed occasionally as they worked, and neither of them pulled away. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it felt like something larger, an acknowledgement of the impossible thing they were attempting. "Your wife and daughter," Nayeli said quietly as they worked. "They would be proud. What you do today." Callan didn't respond immediately. He placed another branch, positioning it carefully. "I don't know about proud, but maybe they'd understand." "That's enough." She nodded. "My sons would not understand. Too young. But my husband, he was like you. Wanted peace. Tried to find way." She paused. "It got him killed. Maybe we'll do better," Callan said. "Maybe we all die trying," she replied. But there was something in her voice that wasn't resignation. It was determination. The kind that came from having nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. The fire structure was complete. Callan struck flint against steel, and the sparks caught. The green wood smoked immediately, thick white columns rising into the still air. Nayeli adjusted the branches, creating the pattern. 3 columns, then 2, then 1. The signal was visible for miles in every direction. Sarah stood beside them, watching the smoke rise. "How long before they see it?" "Not long," Nayeli said. "Not long at all." As if summoned by her words, movement erupted from the northern tree line. Not riders, warriors, at least 15 of them, moving in formation, weapons ready. And at the front, a figure Callan recognized even at a distance by the way the others deferred to him. A war chief, coming fast, coming angry. And behind Callan, from the western tree line, came the sound of horses. Fisk had returned, and he'd brought more men. At least 20 riders, all armed, all ready for a fight. Both sides saw the smoke signal. Both sides saw each other. And both sides were too close to turn back now. The two groups stopped 50 feet apart, with Callan's property in between. The Apache warriors formed a line to the north, weapons drawn but not raised. The riders clustered to the west, rifles visible across their saddles. The smoke signal continued to rise between them, 3 columns to 2 to 1, over and over. Nobody moved. Callan stood near the well, Nayeli beside him. Sarah remained close to the barn, her face pale. Mato and Kahana had positioned themselves near Callan, not in front of him, but alongside. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone watching. The Apache war chief stepped forward. He was tall, his face marked with scars that told of decades of survival. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in Nayeli's wounded shoulder, the settlers, the smoke signal. When he spoke, his voice carried across the distance like thunder. Nayeli responded in the same language, her tone respectful but firm. The exchange went back and forth, rapid and intense. The other warriors watched, their grips tightening on their weapons. Callan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the dynamics. Nayeli was being challenged, her choices questioned, her authority tested. From the western side, Fisk had dismounted. He walked forward slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. Behind him, his men did the same, creating a wall of armed settlers. When Fisk spoke, his voice was cold. "You made your choice, Dryden. Now you live with it." "This isn't about choices," Callan said. "This is about truth." "Truth?" Fisk laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth is you're standing with the people who killed your family. The people who've been raiding our settlements for months. That's the only truth that matters." "They didn't raid Morrison," Callan said loudly, projecting his voice so everyone could hear. "They've been here all morning, wounded, one of them dying. They couldn't have attacked anyone." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "He's right. I saw the raiders who attacked our ranch. There were at least 20 of them. Organized, well-armed." She pointed at Nayeli's group. "These people are barely standing." Fisk's expression darkened. "You're defending them, after what they did to your family?" "I'm telling the truth," Sarah said. "Something you're apparently not interested in." The war chief spoke again, his tone sharp. Nayeli responded, then turned to Callan. "He asks why we trust settlers, why we stand with you. He says it is betrayal." "Tell him," Callan said, "that we're all being betrayed by someone who wants us to keep killing each other." Nayeli translated. The war chief's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or suspicion that there was truth in the words. Kahana stepped forward and spoke directly to the war chief. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The other warriors listened, some nodding slowly. When he finished, the war chief studied him for a long moment before responding. "What did he say?" Callan asked Nayeli. "Kahana tells him about the tracks we saw 3 days ago. Settlers moving at night, dressed in our clothing. He saw them but could not follow. Too many, too dangerous." She paused. "He tells them we have seen this before. Raids that make no sense. Attacks that serve no purpose except to spread anger." One of Fisk's men shouted, "You expect us to believe that? That someone's pretending to be them?" "I believe it," Sarah said, "because the same thing happened to Callan's family. Settlers dressed as warriors, starting a war so they could take land." Fisk's face went very still, too still. Callan watched him, saw the moment of calculation, the flicker of something that might have been fear or might have been guilt. "That's a serious accusation," Fisk said slowly. It's the truth, Callan replied. Someone's been playing both sides, staging attacks, making sure we stay enemies, making sure we keep killing each other. He stepped forward closer to Fisk. The question is, who benefits? Who gets the land when we're all dead? The silence that followed was absolute. Every person there understood what Callan was suggesting. Someone with resources, someone with influence, someone who could move between both communities without suspicion. The war chief spoke again, his tone different now, questioning rather than accusing. Nayeli translated. He asks who this person might be, who has such power. Before Callan could answer, one of the riders shifted nervously. A younger man. His face flushed. He glanced at Fisk, then away quickly. Too quickly. The movement was small, but Callan caught it. So did Nayeli. So did the war chief. Fisk noticed their attention and turned to the young rider. Something you want to say, Collins? Collins shook his head rapidly. No, sir. Nothing. But his hands were shaking. And when Fisk looked at him, there was something in that look that Callan recognized. The same look predators give prey when they're deciding whether to strike. Sarah gasped. She'd seen it too. You, she said to Fisk. It was you. All along. Fisk's hand moved toward his pistol. But before he could draw, the war chief barked an order. Instantly, 3 Apache warriors had arrows knocked and aimed, not at Callan, at Fisk. The riders tensed, raising their rifles. The warriors readied their weapons. Everyone was a heartbeat away from bloodshed. Callan stepped directly into the line of fire. Stop! His voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood between the two groups, arms spread wide, making himself the most vulnerable target on the field. If you start shooting, he said, his voice carrying to everyone, you prove him right. You prove that we can't stop, that we're too far gone. He turned to face the war chief. Your people have lost enough, haven't they? The war chief's expression was unreadable, but he didn't lower his weapon. Callan turned to Fisk's men. And you've buried how many friends? How many family members? How much more will you sacrifice for someone else's profit? Collins spoke up, his voice breaking. He told us it was them. He showed us tracks, gave us locations, said we had to strike first, or they'd wipe us out. Shut your mouth, Fisk snarled. But it was too late. The truth was spilling out now and everyone could hear it. Another rider spoke up. He's been buying up land. Every family that gets wiped out, he makes an offer to whoever's left. Been doing it for 2 years. The war chief lowered his weapon slowly. He spoke to Nayeli, his tone shifting from anger to something colder, more calculating. She nodded and translated for Callan. He says they have seen this too. Families disappearing, land changing hands. Always the same man making offers. She looked at Fisk. Always you. Fisk's face twisted. He was trapped, and he knew it. But trapped men were dangerous. His hand was still near his pistol, and Callan could see the calculations running behind his eyes. How many could he kill before they took him down? How much damage could he do before anyone could move? Nayeli stepped forward to stand beside Callan, then Matto, then Kahana, then Sarah, then Collins, dismounting and walking away from the other riders. One by one, people from both sides moved into the middle ground, creating a wall of bodies between Fisk and escape. The message was clear. The war was over, and Fisk had lost. Fisk's hand moved toward his pistol, but he never cleared the holster. The war chief was faster, crossing the distance in 3 strides and striking Fisk's wrist with the flat of his blade. The pistol fell to the dirt. 2 riders moved to help their former leader, but the other settlers blocked them. Rifles lowered, but bodies firm. It's over, Garrett, Collins said. No more. Fisk looked around at the faces surrounding him. Settlers he'd led, warriors he'd manipulated, all of them watching him with the same expression. Not hatred, something colder, understanding. They saw him now for what he was, not a protector, a predator who'd fed on their grief. The war chief spoke, his words deliberate. Nayeli translated. He says Fisk will be taken to the territorial marshal. Both our people will testify. Both our people will see justice. You can't, Fisk said, his voice losing its authority, becoming something desperate. I was protecting us. The land, the territory. Someone had to take control. You took lives, Sarah said. My brother, Callan's wife and daughter. How many others? Fisk had no answer, or perhaps he had too many answers, and none of them would save him now. Two of the Apache warriors bound Fisk's hands. Not roughly, but efficiently. This wasn't revenge. It was necessity. Collins and another settler agreed to ride with them to the marshal's office, serving as witnesses from both sides. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Former enemies now traveling together to deliver justice. As they prepared to leave, the war chief approached Callan. He spoke at length, his tone formal. Nayeli stood beside Callan, translating quietly. He says you did something today that should not have been possible. You gave water to your enemy. You stood between weapons and certain death. You made warriors and settlers see the truth together. She paused. He says this is how wars end. Not with victory, with someone brave enough to stop fighting. The war chief extended his hand. Callan took it. The handshake was firm, brief, but it represented something larger than either of them. An acknowledgement. A beginning. Tell him, Callan said, that the water was free. It always will be. Nayeli translated. The war chief's expression softened slightly. He nodded once, then returned to his warriors. They began the journey toward the territorial capital, Fisk walking between them, his head down. The remaining settlers dispersed slowly, many of them stopping to speak with Callan before they left, apologizing, thanking him, promising to spread word of what really happened. The story would travel fast now. The truth always did, once someone was brave enough to speak it. Sarah lingered near the barn. I need to go back, she said quietly. To Morrison, to see what's left. To Barry, she couldn't finish. I'll help, Nayeli said. My people will help. We rebuild together. Sarah looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Together. Maddo emerged from the barn with Kahana, supporting Dakota between them. The wounded warrior was conscious now, his breathing stronger. He looked at Callan and spoke a few words. Kahana translated into broken English. He says he owes you his life. Says debt will be remembered. No debt, Callan said. Just water. But they all knew it had been more than that. It had been a choice that rippled outward, touching everyone who witnessed it, changing something fundamental in how they saw each other. The Apache warriors prepared to leave, taking Dakota with them. Nayeli remained behind, standing near the well. The same well where this had all begun just hours ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. You gave water, she said to Callan. Simple thing, but it changed everything. You took it, Callan replied. That changed everything too. She smiled. It was small, tired, but genuine. Maybe there is hope, for both our peoples. Maybe, Callan agreed. She touched his shoulder briefly, then turned to join her warriors. They disappeared into the tree line heading north, moving with purpose but not with urgency. Not like enemies fleeing, like people going home. Callan stood alone in his property as the sun began its descent. The smoke signal had long since died. The bucket sat by the well, empty but clean. He'd fill it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that followed. The well would keep giving water, to whoever needed it, settler or Apache, enemy or friend. Because Callan had learned something today that he'd forgotten in his years of grief. That the distance between enemy and human was sometimes just one act of kindness, one bucket of water, one choice to see the person standing in front of you instead of the uniform they wore or the blood they'd spilled. The war hadn't ended completely. Conflicts that deep never did, but it had changed, shifted. And years later, when people told stories about the territory, they would remember the day a poor rancher offered water to his enemies, and how that simple act had broken something that seemed unbreakable. Proving that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight, and that peace begins not with treaties or surrender, but with one person deciding that compassion matters more than vengeance. Callan Dryden returned to his work, carrying water from the well that would never run dry. If you enjoyed this story of courage and compassion in the untamed West, click the video on your screen now to discover another tale where one decision changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to support us in bringing more powerful stories like this one. Your support means the world. Some offers should never be spoken aloud, especially not in front of 1,000 armed warriors who could end your life before your next breath. But Donovan Pritchard stood in the center of that Apache encampment, surrounded by more horses and weapons than he could count, and made an offer that turned the desert air to ice. 1,000 horses, his entire fortune, his legacy, his pride, everything he had built across 3 decades of blood and sweat. For one night, with another man's wife at his ranch. The words hung in the air like a noose. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either mercy or massacre. And what made it worse, what made every warrior grip their weapons tighter, was that Donovan knew exactly whose wife she was. Kahale, the man who had never lost a negotiation, the man who had never forgiven an insult, the man whose eyes now burned with something far more dangerous than rage. 3 days earlier, Donovan had owned the largest horse ranch within 5 territories. He had men who feared him, rivals who envied him, and a reputation that opened doors from the trading posts to the governor's mansion. But none of that mattered anymore. His son was dying. The boy had 14 days at most, according to the doctor who had ridden 200 miles just to deliver that sentence. Some kind of fever that burned from the inside, turning his son's skin gray and his eyes hollow. No medicine touched it. No prayer seemed to reach it. The doctor had seen it once before, in a mining camp near the Badlands, and everyone infected had died screaming. Donovan had spent 2 weeks hunting every healer, every medicine man, every traveling doctor within riding distance. Most took his money and failed. Some took his money and ran. One old trader finally told him the truth over whiskey in a back room that smelled of tobacco and desperation. There was one person who might know how to stop that fever. A woman who had learned healing from the old ways, before the settlements, before the treaties. She lived with the Apache now. She was married to their leader. And her name was Naira. Donovan knew that name. He had tried to forget it for 7 years, but some things carved themselves too deep to erase. Naira had been part of a small Apache band that used to trade peacefully near his ranch. Back when he was younger and hungrier and stupider about what mattered, there had been a dispute over water rights, a confrontation that got loud, threats on both sides. Then someone's rifle went off and suddenly there were bodies in the dirt and smoke in the air, and Donovan's men were burning lodges to cover their tracks. The territorial marshal called it self-defense and closed the investigation within a week. But Donovan remembered the woman who had stared at him through the flames, holding a wounded child, her eyes promising that this debt would come due someday. That woman was Naira, and now she was the only person who could save his son. So Donovan rode into Apache territory alone, unarmed except for a piece of paper that outlined his offer. He had expected to be killed at the border. Instead, warriors escorted him directly to Kahale. The leader sat on his horse like he had been carved from the desert itself, and beside him sat Naira, watching Donovan with recognition and something that looked almost like satisfaction. Behind them, hundreds of horses moved in the wind, and hundreds of warriors waited to see what the white man wanted badly enough to walk into death's mouth to ask for it. Kahale listened to the offer without expression. 1,000 horses for one night with his wife. The words felt like acid in Donovan's mouth, but he said them anyway because his son's fever was burning hotter every hour, and time was something he no longer had. The silence stretched. Warriors shifted. Horses stamped. Naira's face revealed nothing, but her hand rested on her husband's arm like she was holding him back from something inevitable. Kahale finally spoke, his voice carrying across the camp with the weight of someone who had never needed to raise it. You rode here to insult me in front of my people, to offer horses for one night with my wife like she is property to be traded. Donovan's throat was dry as sand, but he forced himself to hold the man's gaze and speak the full truth. I am asking that she come to my ranch for one night, to save my son who is dying from a fever no doctor can cure. I was told only she has the knowledge to stop it. The clarification did nothing to ease the tension. If anything, it made things worse. Kahale's expression darkened. You want my wife to leave our people, to ride alone to your ranch, to enter the home of the man who burned her village, and you believe 1,000 horses makes this acceptable? The words hit like physical blows because they were all true. Behind Kahale, a warrior raised his rifle. Others followed. The moment balanced on a blade's edge, and Naira had still not spoken a single word. Naira dismounted and walked toward Donovan, while every warrior watched. When she stopped 3 feet from him, she spoke in English clearer than most men he knew. You remember my daughter? Donovan's chest tightened. He remembered a child clutching Naira's leg, while flames consumed everything around them. She died 2 days after your men burned our lodges, from the fever that comes when the body breathes too much smoke and the lungs fill with fluid. Naira's voice stayed level, but her eyes were knives. That is the same fever your son has now. The words hit like stones. Kahale spoke before Donovan could respond. So you understand what you are asking. You want the woman whose child you helped kill to save your child. And you believe one night is enough time to do this. Donovan felt the trap closing but had no choice except to walk into it. I was told she has knowledge that can cure him. I am offering everything I own for that chance. Naira stepped closer. You were told correctly. I do have that knowledge, but you understand nothing about how healing works. She gestured to the warriors around them. These men think you came here to buy me for one night like I am a possession. But even if your offer was genuine, even if you truly only want me to cure your son, one night is not enough. The statement hung in the air. Donovan's desperation must have shown on his face because Naira continued without mercy. The medicine requires plants that grow in the high country, a day's ride north. They must be harvested fresh, prepared precisely. One mistake in the gathering or preparation, and the medicine becomes poison. The treatment itself takes 3 days of carefully timed doses. She paused, letting him understand the impossibility. So your offer of 1,000 horses for one night is meaningless. By the time I rode to your ranch, gathered the plants, prepared them, and treated your son properly, at least 7 days would pass. Maybe more. Donovan felt the ground shifting beneath him. 7 days. His son might not have 7 days. And even if the boy survived that long, asking this woman to spend a week at his ranch, surrounded by his men, in the place where he had planned the attack that killed her daughter, was asking for something no amount of horses could purchase. Then teach me. The words came out before he fully thought them through. Teach me to gather the plants, to prepare them, to administer the treatment. I will do it myself. Naira studied him with an expression that might have been surprise or contempt. You think knowledge passed down through generations can be learned in a conversation? That you can simply be told what to do and then do it correctly? She glanced at Kahale, something unspoken passing between them, then looked back at Donovan. If I teach you, it will not be quick. You will need to ride with me to the high country. Spend days learning to identify the right plants and reject the poisonous ones. Learn how to harvest them without destroying their medicine. Learn preparation methods where the smallest error kills instead of cures. And you will be alone with me at my mercy, trusting that I do not simply lead you into the wilderness and leave you to die. The alternative she presented was somehow more terrifying than the original offer. At least if she came to his ranch, he would be on familiar ground surrounded by his men. But riding north with her, alone, into territory he did not know, completely dependent on someone whose child he had helped kill, that was asking him to place his life in her hands while his son died slowly back home. Kahale's eyes glittered with cold satisfaction. So, you offer 1,000 horses for one night with my wife at your ranch. But what you actually need is something far more difficult. You need her to agree to teach you. You need me to allow my wife to ride into the wilderness alone with the man who destroyed her family. You need 7 days where you are helpless and she holds all the power. And you need to trust that when you return, the knowledge you gained will be enough to save your son before he dies. The sun beat down. Everything in Donovan screamed that this was impossible, that the risk was too great, that he should find another way. But there was no other way. His son was dying, and this woman held the only knowledge that could save him. I accept, he said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. Whatever it takes. 7 days. Alone. At her mercy. I accept. Kahale looked at his wife. She nodded once, sharp and final. He turned back to Donovan with eyes that could freeze fire. Tomorrow morning. Bring the horses to prove your offer is real. Then you ride north with my wife. Alone. If you harm her, your son dies and you die screaming. If you fail to learn what she teaches, your son dies. If you try to run, we will find you. The only way your son lives is if you submit completely to someone you once tried to destroy. The warriors lowered their rifles, not in welcome, in the understanding that death was coming one way or another. Donovan rode back to his ranch through darkness that felt heavier than any he had known. The conversation with his foreman went exactly as expected. You want to give away every horse we own to the Apache? For what? Marcus had worked the ranch for 15 years and his face showed every year of that loyalty. For my son's life, Donovan answered. Marcus looked at him like he had gone mad. The boy is dying either way. The doctor said so. You give away those horses and we got nothing left. No breeding stock, no trade goods, no way to recover. The other men gathered in the bunkhouse nodded agreement. They had families too. Jobs that depended on the ranch surviving. Donovan wanted to scream that they did not understand. that his son was 14 years old and burning from the inside, and that no amount of horses mattered if the boy was dead. But he also knew Marcus was right about the mathematics of it. 1,000 horses represented everything. The ranch would be gutted. Half the men would need to find work elsewhere. The ones who stayed would spend years rebuilding what Donovan was about to trade away. "I'm not asking permission," Donovan said quietly. "I'm telling you what I'm doing. Any man who wants to leave after the horses are gone, I'll write you a reference and won't hold it against you." The room stayed silent. Men shifted. Someone spat tobacco juice into a tin can. Finally, Marcus nodded once, sharp and angry, but nodded. "We'll help you round them up, but don't expect us to pretend this makes sense." By dawn, 1,000 horses stood in a massive herd that took 6 men to control. Donovan's son lay in his bed upstairs, fever-bright and hardly conscious, while his mother sat beside him with a wet cloth and prayers that were starting to sound like goodbyes. Donovan knelt beside the bed and touched his son's forehead. The heat was like touching a stove. "I'm going to fix this," he said. His son's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and glassy. "Don't leave me." The words were barely a whisper. Donovan's throat closed around the promise he wanted to make but could not guarantee. Instead, he said, "I'm bringing back medicine, real medicine. You hold on until I get back." He did not mention where he was going or who he was riding with. His wife would never allow it if she knew. The ride to the Apache camp took 3 hours because the herd moved slowly. When Donovan arrived, Cahal was waiting with 30 warriors and an expression that gave away nothing. They spent 2 hours counting horses, verifying brands, making sure Donovan had not tried to cheat by including old or sick animals. When they finished, Cahal spoke in Apache to his men, and they began sorting the herd with an efficiency that spoke of lifetimes around horses. Naira appeared on a gray mare, carrying supplies in leather bags that looked worn from years of use. She wore traveling clothes and her hair was braided tight. When she rode past Kahali, she touched his hand briefly, and Donovan saw something pass between them that made his chest ache. Trust. Partnership. The kind of thing he and his wife used to have before grief started building walls between them. "We ride now," Naira said without looking at Donovan. "The plants are fresh only certain days. We already lost time because you needed to gather your horses." She kicked her mare forward without waiting. Donovan followed. Behind him, he heard Kahali's voice giving orders in Apache. He did not need a translation to understand the message. If Donovan did not return his wife safely, there would be a reckoning that made the 1,000 horses look like mercy. They rode north into high country where the air thinned and the landscape turned rocky. Naira stayed 50 feet ahead, never slowing to let him catch up, never looking back to see if he followed. After 6 hours, when the sun was directly overhead and heat shimmered off the stones, she finally stopped beside a narrow creek. Donovan dismounted, legs aching and mouth dry as sand. Naira did not offer water or conversation. Instead, she pointed to a plant growing near the creek bank. Small leaves, purple flowers, roots that spread like fingers beneath the surface. "That is what saves your son, or kills him. Depends on how well you listen." The plant looked harmless, almost delicate, but Naira's hands moved around it with the care of someone handling a loaded weapon. "The roots are what matter, but only the outer layer of the root. Go too deep and you harvest poison instead of medicine." She demonstrated with a small knife, peeling away dirt with movements so precise they looked like ritual. Donovan knelt beside her, watching. The sun beat down on his neck and sweat dripped into his eyes, but he did not move. His son's life depended on memorizing every detail, every angle of the knife, every motion of her hands. The fever you call lung sickness happens when the body breathes smoke too long. The lungs become inflamed. They fill with fluid. The person drowns from the inside. Naira's voice stayed flat, clinical, as if she was not describing exactly how her daughter had died. "Your doctors try to drain the fluid. Sometimes it works. Usually the patient dies anyway because they treat the symptom, not the cause." She cut the root free and held it up. Thin white fibers hung from the end like tiny threads. "This root calms the inflammation, lets the lungs heal themselves. But the timing matters. Too early, and it does nothing. Too late, and the damage is permanent." Donovan watched her sort through the roots, selecting some and discarding others based on criteria he could not identify. "How do you know which ones?" Naira glanced at him with something that might have been contempt. "By looking, by learning, by spending years understanding plants instead of assuming everything important can be bought or taken by force." The words stung, But Donovan said nothing. She was right. He had spent his life believing that money and muscle could solve any problem. That knowledge was something you hired people to have while you made the real decisions. Now his son was dying because of that arrogance. The next 3 days followed a pattern that ground Donovan down to nothing. Naira would find a plant and explain its purpose. Then she would make him find 10 more identical specimens without her help. Most of the time, he failed, brought back the wrong plant, or harvested it incorrectly. Each failure meant starting over, learning again, watching her demonstrate with patience that somehow felt crueler than anger. On the 4th day, his hands were cut from thorns and his back ached from kneeling, and his mind was stuffed so full of plant names and preparation methods that he dreamed about roots and leaves and timing. "You are learning too slowly," Naira said as they made camp that night. "Your son has maybe 10 days left. It will take you 2 days to ride home. That leaves 3 days to prepare and administer the medicine. If you make one mistake, he dies." Donovan's hands shook as he tried to start a fire. The flint kept slipping. His fingers would not obey. Finally, Naira took the flint from him and had flames going in 30 seconds. She did not mock him for it, which somehow made it worse. They ate dried meat in silence while the fire crackled. Donovan wanted to ask if she thought he could actually do this, if she believed his son had a chance. But he was afraid of the answer. "Why are you really helping me?" The question came out before he could stop it. Naira stared at the fire for a long time. "I am not helping you. I am helping a boy who did nothing wrong except be born to a coward." The word landed like a slap, but Donovan did not argue. "When your men burned our lodges, I had a choice. I could let hate consume me, let the need for revenge poison everything, or I could decide that one child's death was enough, that I would not let your son die just to balance scales that can never be balanced." She looked at him directly. "My daughter is gone. Nothing brings her back. Not your horses, not your suffering, not even your son's death. So I make a different choice. I teach you how to save him. And maybe, if you learn anything at all from this, you stop being the kind of man who burns villages and calls it protection." The fire popped. Somewhere in the darkness a coyote called. Donovan realized his face was wet, and he was not sure when he had started crying. "I am sorry," he said, and the words felt like trying to bail out the ocean with a cup. Insufficient. Pathetic. But all he had. Naira nodded once. "Tomorrow we harvest the final plants. Then I teach you preparation. You will practice 3 times. If you fail all 3, I go back to my husband and you go home to watch your son die. If you succeed even once, maybe he has a chance." She lay down by the fire and turned her back to him. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow decides everything." Dawn came cold and merciless. Naira had already harvested the final plants by the time Donovan woke, and they lay arranged on a flat stone like pieces of a puzzle he was supposed to solve. "First attempt," she said. "Show me everything." Donovan's hands trembled as he sorted through the roots. He had to select the right thickness, peel only the outer layer, remove exactly enough of the bitter core without going too deep. The knife felt clumsy in his grip. He worked slowly, checking each step against what she had taught him, second-guessing every motion. When he finished, Naira examined his work in silence that stretched until his chest hurt. Then she swept everything off the stone. Wrong. The core piece is too thick. It would make him vomit before the medicine could work. Try again. The second attempt went faster but no better. He peeled too much from one root and not enough from another. The proportions were incorrect. Naira said nothing, just reset the stone with fresh materials and stepped back. Donovan's heart hammered against his ribs. One chance left. His son's face floated in his mind. Fever bright and trusting. The boy believed his father could fix anything, had always believed that. And Donovan was about to prove him wrong one final time. He forced his breathing to slow, made himself remember each lesson not as separate facts, but as a single flowing process. The way Naira's hands moved, the angle of the knife, the smell of the roots when cut correctly versus incorrectly. He worked methodically, checking nothing, trusting muscle memory he was not sure he had built. When he finished, his hands were shaking so badly he had to clench them into fists. Naira studied the prepared medicine for what felt like an hour. She picked up each piece, smelled them, held them to the light. Finally, she wrapped everything in a cloth and handed it to him. "That will work. Barely. If you follow the rest exactly." Relief hit Donovan so hard his knees buckled. He sat down hard on the ground and put his head in his hands. For a moment he could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the weight of the last 5 days and the knowledge that maybe, possibly, his son had a chance. Naira crouched beside him. Listen carefully because I will only say this once. The medicine needs to be given as tea. Boil water until it bubbles. Add the roots. Let it steep until the water turns golden. Not yellow, not brown. Golden, like honey in sunlight. Give him 1 cup at dawn, 1 at midday, 1 at sunset. For 3 days. She paused, making sure he was listening. The first day he will seem worse. The fever will spike. He might become delirious. That is normal. The medicine is forcing his body to fight. Do not stop. Do not panic. Do not let your wife convince you to fetch a doctor who will only interfere. Donovan nodded, memorizing every word. The second day the fever breaks. He will sweat, soak through his bedding. His breathing will become easier, but he will be weak. Give him the tea anyway. Keep him warm. She handed him a second bundle. These are backup roots, in case you spill the first batch or prepare it wrong in your panic. You will not get a third chance. They rode back toward the Apache camp in silence. Donovan kept the medicine bundles in his saddlebag, wrapped in cloth and leather to protect them like they were more valuable than gold. Because they were. When they reached the camp, Kahal was waiting. He looked at his wife first, checking for any sign of harm. Then his eyes moved to Donovan with an expression that promised violence if the answer was wrong. He learned, Naira said simply. Kahal nodded once. Then go. Your son has maybe 6 days left. You waste any more time and the knowledge means nothing. Donovan wanted to thank Naira, wanted to say something that acknowledged what she had given him when she owed him less than nothing. But words felt obscene in the face of what had passed between them. Instead, he nodded to her, then to Kahali, and turned his horse south. He rode hard, pushed the animal to the edge of endurance, and then a little further. Behind him, the Apache camp disappeared into dust and distance. Ahead of him, his son was either dying or waiting. Everything now depended on whether Donovan had actually learned what Naira tried to teach him, and whether mercy could flow from ground soaked in old blood. Donovan reached the ranch after 2 days of riding that left both him and his horse nearly broken. The sun was just rising when he stumbled through the front door, legs barely holding him upright. His wife met him in the hallway, eyes red from crying and no sleep. Where were you? Her voice cracked around the edges. The doctor came back yesterday. He said maybe 3 more days. Maybe less. Donovan did not waste time explaining. He went straight to his son's room and felt his heart drop into his stomach. The boy looked worse than when he had left. Skin gray as ash, breathing shallow and rapid like a trapped bird. The smell of sickness filled the room despite the open window. I have medicine, Donovan said. His wife stared at the cloth bundle in his hands. What medicine? From where? He met her eyes and saw the moment she understood. No, Donovan, no. You went to them? After what happened? Her voice rose with each word. You trusted those people with your life? They could have killed you. They still might have poisoned whatever that is. Donovan pushed past her to the wash basin. They had every reason to let our son die, or to kill me, but they did not, and this is his only chance. He started boiling water while his wife stood in the doorway, torn between fury and desperate hope. When the water bubbled, Donovan added the roots exactly as Naira had shown him. The smell that rose with the steam was bitter and earthy. He watched the color change from clear to pale yellow to the golden shade of honey in sunlight. His hands shook as he poured it into a cup. His son barely woke when Donovan lifted his head. Drink this, he said softly. All of it. The boy's throat worked weakly. Half the tea spilled down his chin, but enough went down. Donovan lowered his son's head back to the pillow and pulled the blanket up. His wife stood frozen by the door. What happens now? Donovan sat in the chair beside the bed. Now we wait. And at midday, I give him more. And at sunset, for 3 days. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Marcus came to the door once, saw Donovan's expression, and left without speaking. Other men gathered in the yard, talking in low voices about the horses that were gone, and the ranch that was gutted, and the boss who had lost his mind. By midday, the boy's fever had climbed higher. His skin burned to the touch and he thrashed in his sleep, mumbling words that made no sense. Donovan's wife clutched his arm. He is getting worse. We need the doctor. We need to stop this. Donovan gently removed her hand. Naira said this would happen. The medicine forces the body to fight. It looks worse before it improves. He prepared the second cup of tea, hands steadier now, and managed to get most of it down his son's throat. The sunset dose went the same, fever raging, the boy delirious and calling for people who were not there. Donovan did not sleep that night, just sat in the chair and watched his son's chest rise and fall, counting each breath like it might be the last. The second day began with the fever still burning. Donovan's wife had stopped arguing, but the doubt in her eyes cut deeper than any words. He prepared the dawn tea with movements that had become automatic, made sure the color was right, the temperature correct, got it into his son despite the boy fighting him weakly. Marcus appeared in the doorway around midday. Some of the men are leaving, taking what pay you owe them and heading out. Figured you should know. Donovan nodded without looking away from his son. Give them what they are owed, and thank them for staying as long as they did. That afternoon, something changed. The fever began to drop. Not dramatically, not like a miracle, but degree by degree the boy's skin cooled. His breathing became less frantic. When evening came and Donovan gave the third dose of the day, his son's eyes opened briefly and seemed to actually see him. "Dad?" The word was barely a whisper. Donovan's throat closed around the response. He just nodded and smoothed the boy's hair back from his forehead. His wife stood in the corner, hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The boy fell back asleep, but it looked different now, less like dying and more like actual rest. Donovan allowed himself the smallest measure of hope, but Naira had said 3 days, and they were only through 2. The third day arrived with morning light that felt different, cleaner somehow. Donovan prepared the dawn tea and carried it to his son's room with his wife following close behind. The boy was awake, actually awake, not the fever dream half-consciousness of the past weeks. His eyes tracked movement, and when he spoke, his voice was weak but clear. "I am thirsty." Such simple words, but they hit Donovan like a thunderclap because they meant his son's mind was working again, meant he was aware enough to feel thirst. Donovan helped him drink the tea and then brought water. His son managed 3 sips before exhaustion pulled him back down, but he was smiling slightly when sleep took him. Marcus returned that afternoon while Donovan was preparing the midday dose. Most of the men left. 5 stayed. "We can probably keep the ranch going with that if we work twice as hard." He paused, studying Donovan's face. "The boy looks better." Donovan nodded, not trusting his voice. Marcus continued, "I was wrong about the horses, about calling you crazy. If my son was dying and someone told me they could save him for every horse in the territory, I would have done the same." He cleared his throat roughly. "We will rebuild. Take longer than it should, but we will manage." The midday dose went down easier. The boy stayed awake long enough to ask what had happened. Donovan told him a simplified version, that he had been very sick, that the medicine came from people who knew old healing methods. He did not mention the Apache, did not mention the 1,000 horses or the 7 days in the high country, or the woman whose daughter had died from the same fever. Those were weights Donovan would carry alone. By sunset, his son was sitting up slightly, propped on pillows, eating a few spoonfuls of broth. The fever was gone. The gray color had left his skin. He looked exhausted and thin, but alive in a way that Donovan had stopped believing was possible. His wife came to him that night after their son had fallen into genuine restful sleep. "I'm sorry I doubted you." Donovan shook his head. "You had every reason to doubt. I gave away everything we built. Trusted people I had wronged. By any reasonable measure, I gambled our entire future on something that should not have worked." She touched his face gently. "But it did work, and our son is alive. That makes you either the bravest man I know or the most foolish." "Maybe both." They stood together in the doorway, watching their son breathe easily for the first time in weeks. The ranch was gutted. Half the men were gone. Years of work had been traded away in a desperate bargain. But their son was sleeping peacefully, and that made every loss bearable. The next morning, Donovan gave his son the final dose. The boy drank it without assistance and asked for more food afterward. Color was returning to his face, strength to his voice. The medicine had worked. Against all probability and reason, Naira's knowledge had pulled his son back from death's edge. Donovan stood at the window, looking north toward Apache territory that he could not see but knew was there. He thought about Naira's daughter who had died from this same fever, about the choice she had made to save his son despite having every reason to let the boy die, about mercy that flowed from ground soaked in old blood. Marcus found him there. "What are you thinking about?" Donovan was quiet for a long moment. "About debts that can never be fully repaid, and about the kind of strength it takes to choose healing over revenge. Marcus nodded slowly. Those Apache got their horses, that is payment enough by any measure. But Donovan knew it was not about the horses, had never been about the horses. The 1,000 horses were just proof that he understood what he was asking for, that he was willing to sacrifice everything for knowledge he had once dismissed as primitive. The real payment was the 7 days of humiliation, of learning, of being forced to see himself clearly and hate what he saw. That was what Naira had demanded, and what Kahali had enforced. Not gold or livestock, but transformation. 2 weeks later, Donovan's son was walking, slowly, with his mother's hand on his arm, but walking. The color had returned to his face and his appetite with it. The doctor who had pronounced him dying rode out to the ranch, examined the boy, and left shaking his head in confusion. I have never seen anyone recover from that fever. Whatever you did, it should not have worked. But it had worked, and Donovan knew exactly why. He spent those 2 weeks thinking about the offer that had shocked an entire tribe, about how it sounded like an insult, but was really a father's desperate plea translated through ignorance and privilege, about how Kahali and Naira could have let him fail, could have taken his horses and given him false knowledge that would have killed his son. They had chosen differently. On the 15th day after his return, Donovan rode north again. Marcus tried to stop him. You already paid them. Your business with the Apache is finished. Donovan shook his head. No, it is not. He rode alone, carrying supplies on a pack horse. When he reached the Apache camp, warriors surrounded him immediately with rifles ready. He raised his hands, showing he was unarmed, and waited. Kahal appeared on horseback with Naira beside him. The leader's expression was unreadable. You return. Why? Donovan dismounted slowly. To say thank you, and to ask how I can help your people the way you helped mine. Silence spread through the camp. Warriors exchanged glances. Cahal's eyes narrowed. You think thanks erases what you did? No, Donovan said quietly. Nothing erases it. But I learned something in those 7 days. I learned that my people take and call it progress. We destroy and call it civilization. We steal knowledge and call it science. He gestured to the pack horse. I brought medical supplies, blankets, things your people might need. I will bring more when I can. And I will speak truth about what happened to your village. Not the story the marshal told. The real story. Naira dismounted and walked toward him. Her face was as hard as stone, but she stopped close enough to speak quietly. Your son is well? Donovan nodded. Because of you. Because you chose mercy when I deserved none. She studied him for a long moment. My daughter is still dead. Your gifts do not change that. I know, Donovan said. But maybe they change what happens next. Maybe they mean one less village burned, one less family destroyed, one less child dying because people like me decide that fear justifies everything. Cahal dismounted and stood beside his wife. He looked at Donovan with eyes that still carried judgment, but also something else. Something that might have been the beginning of respect. The offer you made shocked my people because it sounded like you were buying my wife, like she was property. But Naira told me what the offer really meant. 7 days where you would be helpless, where you would have to learn from someone you once tried to destroy, where your pride would be ground to dust. He paused. That took more courage than I expected from you. Donovan met his gaze. It took desperation. But desperation showed me things I had refused to see. About what my people do, about what I did, about the difference between taking and asking, between conquering and learning. Cahal nodded slowly. Keep your supplies. We do not need charity from you. But if you truly want to help, then change how your people see mine. Stop them from burning more villages, from taking more land, from deciding that anything they want is theirs by right. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something fierce and final. Your son lives because my wife chose mercy. Honor that mercy by becoming someone who deserves it. Donovan left the Apache camp as the sun set, riding back toward a ranch that was smaller now but felt different. His son was alive. His understanding of the world had been shattered and rebuilt. The offer that had shocked the tribe was never about one night. It was about 7 days of transformation, about a father learning that some knowledge cannot be taken, only given, about a woman who chose to heal the son of the man who helped kill her daughter. That was the real shock, not the 1,000 horses or the crude words of the offer, but the mercy that followed, and the question of whether Donovan would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it. The story of what happened spread through the territories in whispers and speculation. Some said the rancher had gone mad. Others said he had been tricked. But those who knew the truth understood something different. That sometimes the most shocking offer is not the one that insults, but the one that asks for forgiveness from people who have every right to refuse it, and that the real price of salvation is not what you pay, but who you become after. We have more stories from the untamed frontier waiting for you. Click the video on your screen now to see what happens when a debt is paid in ways no one expected. And if you want to hear more tales where honor, justice, and survival collide in the American wilderness, subscribe to our channel. These stories need to be told. Click that video now.